Eustace Mullins, Curse of Canaan.
Preface. After 40 years of patient study of the crises which faces humanity, I arrived at a very simple conclusion: all conspiracies are satanic. In retrospect, this conclusion should surprise no one. I admit that it came as something of a surprise to me. I had never anticipated that my decades of work would lead to such an all-encompassing and unchallengeable solution. This answer had eluded me through the years, not because I was on the wrong track, but because I had not yet consulted the ultimate source of knowledge, the Bible. To trace the machinations of the materialist conspiracy, I had deliberately limited myself to materialist sources, reference material on banking, politics, economics, and the biographies of those who were most deeply involved in these affairs. When at last I did decide to look up some references in the Bible, a task which was greatly simplified by a number of excellent concordances, such as Nelson's and Strong's, I was overwhelmed by its immediacy, by its directness, and by the applicability of its words to present-day happenings. As the months went by and I continued this research, I was not overwhelmed by a sense of déjà vu, but by an overpowering conviction that very little had changed in the last 3,000 years. My first revelation was that God has no secrets from man. It is Satan who must confine his work to stealthy conspiracies, to deception, and to promises which will never be kept. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. Rev. 12-9. It is for this reason that politicians, of necessity, must become followers of Satan in the rebellion against God. Politicians must deceive the people in order to gain power over them, just as Satan must deceive the whole world if he is to continue his rebellion against God. Satan takes you to the top of the mountain and offers you all the kingdoms of the earth. Martin Luther King proclaimed, "I have been to the top of the mountain," but he never revealed what had taken place there. The politician offers you free food, free lodging, free medical care. Everything will become free at last. The politician offers to defend you against your enemies, so that he can deliver you to the ultimate enemy, Satan. God does not make offers to you in competition with Satan and his politicians. What could God offer you when he has already given you the whole world? What more could he do than to send his only begotten Son to preserve this world for you when it was threatened by Satan? And why would God wish to veil his love for you behind arcane mysteries, occult conspiracies, and obscene practices? Once my return to the Bible had given me the answers for which I had been seeking so many years, I realized that I had arrived at the culmination of this life's work. I had eagerly sought out the facts about each of the many conspiracies, and I now was able to define their interlocking into the one world conspiracy of conspiracies. I had traced the names and activities of the principal actors in the satanic drama which this world has become, a world which I described in 1968 in My Life in Christ as Satan's Empire. This was an oversimplification, although I was not aware of it at that time. I had written this book under great stress. My father had died as the result of harassment by federal agents. Their goal was to force me to give up this work. Other members of my family continued to undergo daily harassment because of the federal campaign against me. I had not been overcome by despair, but it did seem to me, in that period of my life, that Satan had indeed achieved a temporal victory over this world, not a permanent victory, but a gain which he could defend and which he might consolidate for years to come. The next 40 years brought me many startling revelations of the behind-the-scenes forces which had planned and perpetrated the mass murders of humanity. I had finally, as one writer put it, uncovered the forces of war. I was also able to find the sources of the satanic ideology which has been consistently employed to deceive humanity, and to trick them into becoming unwitting tools of the satanic programs, an ideology which we encounter today in various forms, such as communism, Fabianism, secular humanism, and other disguises. February 22, 1987. Contents: 1. The War Against Shem. 2. The Transgression of Cain. 3. Secular Humanism. 4. England. 5. The French Revolution. 6. The American Revolution. 7. The Civil War. 8. The State of Virginia. 9. The World Wars. 10. The Menace of Communism. 11. The Promise. Chapter 1. The War Against Shem. They sacrificed unto demons, which were no gods. doi. 32-17. In the churches of America, Christians worship a somewhat paternal god, the bearded patriarch whom Michelangelo depicted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, an authoritarian figure who is also the father of our teacher, and our Savior, Jesus Christ. God is revered as the original creator of our universe, and as the ultimate moral guide. In this scenario, humanity is a somewhat innocuous group, placed in a pastoral setting, generally obedient to the laws of God, and subject to punishment when disobedience occurs. Religious observance based on this concept is adequate until this Arcadian scene is disturbed by misadventures or calamities. It also begs the question of innate or inescapable evil. Satan, the fallen angel, and rebel against God. Satan, a Hebrew word meaning adversary, appears in the Bible. There are frequent references to God's admonishment, and often, chastisement, of wrongdoers, both individually and in large groups. Here again, the persistent appearance of evil throughout the history of mankind is dealt with as it occurs, but it is difficult to fix either its sources or its causes. Therefore, humanity has existed under a considerable disadvantage, unable to recognize or understand evil before being injured by it. Indeed, the great movement of modern history has been to disguise the presence of evil on the earth, to make light of it, to convince humanity that evil is to be tolerated, treated with greater understanding, or negotiated with, but under no circumstances should it ever be forcibly opposed. This is the principal point of what has come to be known as today's liberalism, more popularly known as secular humanism. The popular, and apparently sensible, appeal of humanism is that humanity should always place human interests first. The problem is that this very humanism can be traced in an unbroken line all the way back to the biblical Curse of Canaan. Humanism is the logical result of the demonology of history. Modern-day events can be understood only if we can trace their implications in a direct line from the earliest records of antiquity. These records concern pre-Adamic man, a hybrid creature whose origins are described in ancient books. The Book of Enoch, which itself is part of an earlier Book of Noah, written about 161 BC, says that Samjaza, Satan, the leader of a band of 200 angels, descended on Mount Carmel. They had lusted after the daughters of men from afar, and now they took them for wives. These fallen angels, known as the Order of the Watchers, taught their wives magic. The issue of these unions was a race of giants, known as Nephilim. The Bible does not mention the Nephilim specifically by name, and Strong's Concordance does not list them. However, Nelson's Concordance has several listings under Nephilim. The verses of the Bible to which it refers are Genesis chapter 6 verse 4, "There were giants in the earth in those days." The Revised Standard Version does give the name of the Nephilim, the same verse reading, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days." These giants later became known as the sons of Anak. In Numbers chapter 13 verse 33, we read, "And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants." These giants constituted a powerful menace to other peoples. In Deuteronomy chapter 9 verse 2 is the complaint, "Who can stand before the children of Anak?" Nevertheless, they were finally killed or driven out. There were none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. Joshua chapter 11 verse 22. These early giants would be considered as mutations by modern scientists. Because of their peculiar parentage, they had habits and lusts which horrified their neighbors. Their leader, Satan, the adversary of God, also known as Satana, was the serpent who entered into and seduced Eve, producing the first murderer, Cain *. Not only were the Nephilim a menace to others, their uncontrollable hatred and violence sometimes led them to attack and kill each other. They then ate their victims, introducing cannibalism to the world. According to some accounts, God slaughtered them, while the archangel Michael imprisoned the fallen angels, the Order of the Watchers, in deep chasms in the earth. Unfortunately for humanity, this was not the end of the matter. Satan, through his children, the Nephilim, and also through Cain, had now established a demonic presence on the earth. His rebellion against God's world result in continuous suffering and travail on earth for centuries to come. The history of mankind since his rebellion is the history of the struggle between the people of God and the cult of Satan. With this understanding, it is now possible to trace the historical events which reveal the actual archives of the two adversaries. The Book of Zohar stresses the Talmudic legend that demons originated in sexual congress between humans and demonic powers. This offers a reasonable explanation as to why all occult ceremonies stress three things: drugs, incantations which express hatred of God, and bizarre sexual practices. The study of demonology in history discloses answers to otherwise inexplicable aspects of man's history. The torture and murder of children, obscene rites and mass killings of innocents in worldwide wars, as well as other catastrophes, are phenomena which bear little or no relation to mankind's day-by-day routine of tilling the soil, raising families, and maintaining the standards of civilization. On the contrary, these types of calamities are direct assaults on the normal existence of humanity. Furthermore, they are expressions of the rebellion against God, as attacks on his people. Footnote, **, according to mythology, because of their extraordinary powers, demons have always attracted a certain number of followers on earth. Secret organizations, which insist on concealing their rights and their programs from all outsiders, must do so in order to prevent exposure and the inevitable punishment. While they were wandering in the desert, the Jewish tribes worshipped demons and monsters. They revered their mythical monsters, Leviathan, Behemoth, Rahab, who well may have been survivors of the tribe of giants, the Nephilim. They also made sacrifices to the demon of the desert, Azazel. Their mythology developed a certain hierarchy of demons. A demonic, who presumably was Satan, ruled over all demons on earth. He was also known as the Prince of Evil, Belial, the Hebrew Bealiah, meaning Yahweh is Baal. Next in the hierarchy of demons was Asmodeus, king of the demons, and his wife, Lilith, chief demoness of the Jews. Lilith is well known today as the patron goddess of the lesbians. Her name survives in many current organizations, such as the Daughters of Lilith. This choice of a patroness suggests that there may always have been a certain amount of demoniac impulses in homosexual practices. This motivation would fit in with the basic rites of occultism, such as defiance of God, and the development of unusual lifestyles. The inevitable retribution for these practices has now appeared among us in the form of the widespread plague of AIDS. Lilith is typical of the demons who were created by sexual intercourse between the daughters of man and the Watchers. They first appeared during the 6 days of creation as disembodied spirits, and later took physical form. The Book of Zohar says, every pollution of semen gives birth to demons. The Encyclopedia Judaica refers to the impurity of the serpent who had sexual relations with Eve. The Kabbalah claims that Lilith had intercourse with Adam and produced demons as part of the cosmic design, in which the right and the left are the opposing currents of pure and impure powers, filling the world, and dividing it between the Holy One and the serpent Samael. Zohar Bereshit 73b, 53 et seq. Webster's Dictionary says of Lilith, Heb, meaning of the night. 1. Jewish folklore, a female demon vampire. 2. Jewish folklore, first wife of Adam before the creation of Eve. Many legends identify Lilith as the first wife of Adam. These myths claim that God formed Lilith out of mud and filth. She soon quarreled with Adam. Because of her overweening pride, she refused to let him lie on top of her. It is for this reason that she was adopted as the patroness of the lesbians. She left Adam and fled to the shores of the Red Sea, where she was said to indulge in her sexual fantasies with demons, living among the wild beasts and hyenas. Her presence gave rise to many terrifying legends. She became the chief of Jewish demonesses and was said to prey on newly born children, sucking the life out of them. She also was known to suck the blood from men who were sleeping alone and is referred to as the night hag. Isaiah chapter 34 verse 14. And wild beasts shall meet with hyenas, the satyr shall cry to his fellow, yea, there shall the night hag alight, and find for herself a resting place. Except for this one verse, her name was excised from all scripture because of her unsavory reputation. Other legends claim that Lilith and her accompanying demonesses ruled over the 4 seasons, as Lilith Nama, Mentrel, Agrath, and Naaloth. They were said to gather on a mountaintop near the mountains of darkness, and there celebrate the witches' Sabbath, when they would have intercourse with Samael, the prince of demons. It was because God had had such an unfortunate result with Lilith, after creating her out of mud and filth, that he decided to go to Adam's rib for his next creation, Eve. She was subsequently known as Hawa, mother of all the living, and also as the serpent mother, because of her later association with Satan. The Prince of Darkness had a number of disguises, but when he incarnated sexual desire, as he did for Eve, he always appeared as a serpent. Because evil was now established on earth, through the presence of the demons and their followers, it was necessary for God to punish mankind. In inflicting this punishment, he resolved to be just. For this, it was necessary for him to select those who were without stain, and who would be allowed to survive the punishment. His method of selection was a simple one. He chose those who had not been contaminated. His choice was Noah and his family. Noah is described in Genesis chapter 6 verse 9. Noah was perfect in his generations. The word generations here is an imperfect translation of the Hebrew word to ied or, which means ancestry. An earlier and more appropriate translation is, Noah was a just man, and perfect, without blemish in his generations. He was God's choice because he and his family were the last remaining pure-blooded Adamites in the world. The Revised Standard Version has an even greater error in its wording. Noah was blameless in his generations, since it does not state what he would have been blamed for. The site of the flood, which was God's prescribed punishment for mankind, was not in the Near Eastern area, as is commonly supposed. Archaeologists have been puzzled for years that they could find no evidence of such a flood in this area. In fact, because Cain had been banished east of Eden, Noah and his family lived in the Tarim Basin, located in the upper Xinjiang province. This basin was fed by the river Tarim, and here the deluge took place. Having been warned by God of the impending catastrophe, Noah succeeded in building the ark, one of the greatest engineering feats of all time. Weighing 36,750 tons, it was built entirely of wood. It was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet in depth. On this ark, God commanded Noah to take of every living thing of all flesh. Because of the limited space on the ark, there could be no possibility of further reproduction of these species during their time aboard, and God commanded that no intercourse should take place. This commandment was violated by an inhabitant of the ark, Ham, the second son of Noah. Ham had intercourse with a pre-Adamite woman on the ark, a dark-skinned person. Their offspring was a black son named Cush, who became the symbol of Ethiopia. Noah was dismayed when he learned that his son had violated God's commandment, because he knew that retribution would come. After the flood had subsided, and life on earth went back to its usual routine, Noah continued to be haunted by his fears. The subsequent occurrences have since had dire consequences for all of mankind. In the Bible, it appears as somewhat of a riddle, since the characters are identified and misidentified in sequential verses. Neither the exact sequence of events, their explanation, or the identification of the principles can be followed as it appears in Genesis, possibly due to mistranslations or editing over the centuries. Although life on earth had resumed its pre-deluge felicity, Noah continued to be distressed by Ham's transgression. So vexed was he that he drank too much wine, and he lay exposed in his drunkenness. As it is recounted in Genesis chapter 9 verses 24 to 27, Ham's son Canaan saw his grandfather exposed, although at one point he is referred to as Noah's youngest son, instead of the correct designation as his grandson. Noah's other sons, Shem and Japheth, seeing their father exposed, hastened to cover him with a cloak. However, when he awakened, Noah was greatly infuriated by what had taken place, and he pronounced a curse on Canaan. Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers, Shem and Japheth. Here again is something of a riddle, as Shem and Japheth were the uncles of Canaan, not his brothers. The riddle is probably an intentional one, because it is intended to evoke a special study of these verses to come to an understanding of these very important messages, warnings to all future generations. Various explanations have been offered for Noah's tremendous anger at Canaan, and his curse of Canaan. One, which has now largely been discounted, is that Ham may have slept with Noah's wife, or that he had made an attempt to do so. No basis for this conjecture has ever been established. Another explanation is that Noah cursed Canaan because he was still vexed at Ham's violation of God's commandment to the inhabitants of the ark, that they should refrain from intercourse while on board. Because Ham had slept with the pre-Adamite woman on the ark, Noah finally vented his wrath in the curse of Canaan. This also fails to ring true. The men of the Old Testament were very direct in their dealings. If Noah was vexed with Ham, he would have cursed Ham, not Canaan. None of these explanations offers a valid reason for the vehemence of Noah's curse, a curse which has blighted humanity for 3,000 years. The only rational explanation for the curse is Noah's anger that Canaan had done something which thoroughly outraged his grandfather. Looking on him while he was exposed would hardly have caused such a reaction. Scholars finally concluded that Canaan had done something so degrading that Noah had to pronounce a curse upon him. What would this have been? The Bible as presently translated does not really give us a clue. These scholars decided that Canaan, being of mixed race, and therefore not bound by the rigid moral code of the Adamites, had probably committed a homosexual act on his grandfather. Being of pure stock, Noah would have been exceedingly wroth at such an act, and would have reacted as he did. The curse of Canaan was extended to the land which was named after him, the land of Canaan. The Canaanites themselves, the people of this land, became the greatest curse upon humanity, and so they remain today. Not only did they originate the practices of demon worship, occult rites, child sacrifice, and cannibalism, but as they went abroad, they brought these obscene practices into every land which they entered. Not only did they bring their demonic cult to Egypt, but known by their later name, the Phoenicians, as they were called after 1200 BC, they became the demonizers of civilization through successive epochs, being known in medieval history as the Venetians, who destroyed the great Byzantine Christian civilization, and later as the black nobility, which infiltrated the nations of Europe and gradually assumed power through trickery, revolution, and financial legerdemain. The reputation of Canaan is to be found in many ancient records, although its foul history has been carefully expunged from even more of the historic archives and libraries. In 1225 BC, the pharaoh Merneptah, who, because of his victories in the Canaanite region, was known as Binder of Gezer, set up a stele to commemorate his successes. Among the inscriptions placed thereon was this: "Plundered is the Canaan, with every evil, all lands are united and pacified." This inscription did not mean that Merneptah had used every evil to plunder the Canaan, it meant that he had in his sojourn there encountered every evil practiced by this notorious tribe. Ham had 4 sons: Cush, who founded the land of Ethiopia; Mizraim, who founded Egypt; Put, who founded Libya; and Canaan, who founded the land of the Canaanites, the area now in contention as the state of Israel. In the Aggadah, Cush is said to be black-skinned as punishment for Ham's having had intercourse on the ark. 3 copulated to the ark, and they were all punished: the dog, the raven, and Ham. The dog was doomed to be tied, the raven expectorates his seed into the mouth of his mate, and Ham was smitten in his skin. Note 9, San. 108b. I.e., from him descended Cush, the Negro, who is black-skinned. In Talmudic literature, Cushi always means a black person or the Negro race. Cushite is synonymous with black. Yah Mot Katan 16b. The Bible as presently translated makes no reference to Usher's color. Reference to his descendants, the Cushites, appears only in Numbers and in Samuel Book 2. Numbers chapter 12 verse 1 reveals that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Here again, no explanation is given as to why Miriam and Aaron turned against Moses, yet the matter is obviously of some importance, because the same verse emphasized by repetition that he had married a Cushite woman. We find the explanation by turning to the Talmud, which tells us that Cushite always means black. The verse in Numbers should read, and originally may have read, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the black or Cushite woman he had married. 2 Samuel contains 7 references to Cushites, but again no descriptions are given. Professor Sai, the noted Egyptian scholar, and authority on the ancient Near and Middle East, explains that Canaan means low, and Elam means high. The Canaanites were those who inhabited the low places, the Elamites occupied the high ground. Colonel Garnier, in his great work, The Worship of the Dead, quotes Strabo's observation that the Cushites inhabit the coastal regions of all Asia and Africa. They were never aggressive enough to fight for or remain on higher ground, and were forced to remain in the low, swampy areas, exposed to the elements, areas which other peoples would not contest them for. Garnier continues, p. 78 of The Worship of the Dead, we have also seen that Osiris was black, or of the Cushite race, and this was characteristic of the Egyptians. Herodotus speaks of the Egyptians generally as black and woolly-haired. There were 2 races in Egypt, the Mizraimites, who first colonized the country, and the black Egyptians, the latter receiving their name from Aegyptus, the son of Belus, i.e. Cush. There can be little doubt, therefore, that Aegyptus, the father of the black Egyptians, and son of Belus, is the same as the black Osiris. On p. 92 Garnier informs us, the Aryan immigration and Brahmanism were subsequent to that of a Cushite race more or less hostile to them and their religion. We find Aryan traditions speaking of themselves as white and the Dacians as black, i.e. Cushite. Garnier quotes a description of the Cushites as follows: they call them demons and devil worshippers, and lascivious wretches who make a god of the Cisna, the lingam, and the phallus. Garnier goes on, p. 131, to observe that Buddha must be identified with those gods whose human origin was Cushite, from Cush, the great prophet and teacher of the ancient paganism, the father of the black or Ethiopian race. Buddha, although the chief god of the yellow race, is constantly represented as black with woolly hair and Negro features, the flat noses and thick lips of many of the ancient statues which occur in Hindustan, for these are clearly the well-known features of the genuine African Negro. The human origin of Buddha was Cush. Ham's subsequent acts did nothing to clear his reputation. He stole the garments which God had made for Adam and Eve before he expelled them from the Garden of Eden. Cush inherited these garments from Ham and passed them on to his son, Nimrod. Because of these garments, Nimrod became known as the Mighty Hunter. He was considered to be invincible as long as he wore these garments, which are recorded in Genesis chapter 3 verse 21. Animals and men cowered before the onslaught of Nimrod because of these garments, which conferred great powers upon him. Encyclopedia Judaica. Nimrod, who was born on December 25, the high Sabbath of Babylon, was the founder of Babylon and the city of Nineveh. In the history of mankind, Nimrod stands unequaled for his symbolism of evil and satanic practices. He is credited for having founded Freemasonry and for building the legendary Tower of Babel, in defiance of God's will. In Talmudic literature, he is noted as he who made all the people able against God, Pays 94b. The legend of the Midrash recounts that when Nimrod was informed of Abraham's birth, he ordered all the male children killed, to be certain of eliminating him. Abraham was hidden in a cave, but in latter life he was discovered by Nimrod, who then ordered him to worship fire. Abraham refused and was thrown into the fire. The legendary symbol for Nimrod is X. The use of this symbol always denotes witchcraft. When X is used as a shortened form meaning Christmas, it actually means to celebrate the feast of Nimrod. A double X, which has always meant to double cross or betray, in its fundamental meaning indicates one's betrayal into the hands of Satan. When American corporations use the X in their logo, such as Exxon, the historic Rockefeller firm of Standard Oil of New Jersey, there can be little doubt of this hidden meaning. The importance of Nimrod in any study of the occult cannot be overemphasized. Because of the powers given him by the clothing of Adam and Eve, Nimrod became the first man to rule the whole world. He indulged that power by launching excesses and horrors which have never been equaled. Ever since the time of Nimrod, Babylon has been the symbol of depravity and lust. Nimrod also introduced the practice of genocide to the world. His grandfather, Ham, having consorted with other races, and brought children of mixed race into the world, was persuaded by his consort, the evil Nama, to practice ritual murder and cannibalism. She informed Ham that by killing and eating fair-skinned people, his descendants could regain their superior qualities. Throughout the ensuing centuries, the fair-skinned descendants of Shem, Noah's oldest son, have ritually been slaughtered by the darker descendants of Ham and Nimrod, in the world's most persistent campaign of racial and religious persecution. Not only did Nimrod kill and eat the fair-skinned descendants of Shem, in his fury and hatred he often burned them alive. The type of human sacrifice involving the eating of the slaughtered human victims derived its name from the combined names of his uncle, Canaan, and the demon god Baal, the two names being combined to form the word cannibal. Nimrod was also known in ancient history by the names of Marduk, Bel, and Merodach. Because of his importance in its history, Babylon was known as the land of Nimrod. Nimrod is also cited in the most ancient Masonic constitutions as the founder of Freemasonry. Nimrod's downfall reputedly came about when he began to build the Tower of Babel, a ziggurat, or temple tower, which was planned to rise up into the heavens. Because of this offense against God, Shem, the eldest son of Noah, pronounced judgment against Nimrod, and executed him. Josephus says that Ham's black grandson, Nimrod, was beheaded by Shem. Other accounts add that Shem then cut Nimrod's body into pieces and sent the pieces to the pagan temples of Babylon, as a warning to the priests that their sex orgies and child sacrifices would result in a similar judgment of execution. Instead of abandoning their hideous ceremonies because of this warning, the priests literally went underground. No longer did their altars smoke with human blood, as Kiddo, the great Palestinian authority, described them. The priests took the pieces of Nimrod as relics to their secret meeting places, which were hidden in groves and shrines. This was the origin of the secret mystery cults, whose orgies could no longer be performed in public temples. Because of the power of Shem, the priests from that time on conducted their forbidden orgies out of the light of day, in their secret hiding places. Their meetings were bounded with secret rites, which no one outside of their order was permitted to know, on pain of death. This was the origin of the Gnostics, the knowing ones, who knew the secrets. It may be for this reason that Nimrod became known as the founder of Freemasonry, because its fundamental rites were established and invoked after he was killed, in order to carry on his work of evil. The history of mankind for the past 3,000 years has been the history of struggle between the fair-skinned descendants of Shem and the darker-skinned descendants of his brother, Ham, yet you will not find this struggle defined in any historical work. The records of the genocide against the people of Shem are apparent throughout the archives of history, but there is not a school or university whose faculty will apprise its students of this simple fact. This in itself explains much which is usually dismissed as being beyond explanation. The reason for this odd development is that the descendants of Ham traditionally have usurped the educational process, through their earlier usurpation of the priesthood to carry on their satanic work. They have controlled the educational system ever since, converting it to their own evil purposes. It is of even greater interest that not a single school of theology anywhere in the world takes note of this central fact of history, a red thread which runs continuously through the record of events. In the Greek language, Shem appears as Ehu. In Egyptian mythology, he is Shu, the son of Ra, the sun god. It was through claimed descent from Shem that Louis, king of France, called himself the Sun King. However, a much more important point, and one that has again been obscured or hidden by the priests who controlled the educational system throughout the last 3,000 years, is the fact that it was Shem who founded and built the great civilization of Egypt. The rulers of Egypt were called pharaohs, from the Hebrew word pira, meaning long hair. The native Egyptians were short-haired. Not only was Shem long-haired, he was also fair-haired. In their records, the priests call Shem Shufu, or Khufu, which means long hair. Being a great warrior, Shem easily led his people in the conquest of the native Egyptians. He immediately set about to commemorate his reign by building the Great Pyramid at Giza. Babylon was then overcome by the son of Shem, Elam, a later descendant, Cyrus of Persia, an Elamite, completed the final conquest of Babylon and built the Great Persian Empire. It was to signify his great military successes that Shem adopted as his symbol the lion, which is still the symbol of rulers today. The Great Pyramid was later called Kiat, the horizon, in which Khufu had been swallowed up, as the western horizon swallowed up the sun each evening. After extensive archaeological investigations, the Royal Astronomer of Scotland concluded that the evidence was irrefutable that the Great Pyramid at Giza had been built by Shem. He found the name Shufu inside the pyramid, painted in red, which signified Shem's fair hair. Also inside the pyramid is an inscription placed there after the death of his descendant, Amenhotep IV. He stopped the barbaric practices of the priests which had been introduced by Nama and her followers from Babylon, including Nimrod. The priests murdered Amenhotep IV, so that they could resume their orgies of lust and child sacrifices. They had admitted to Herodotus that the Great Pyramid had been built by a wandering shepherd, an odd observation, as shepherds do not usually create such grandiose monuments to themselves. However, this was one of the terms of derision by which they always referred to Shem after his death. Other inscriptions by the priests throughout centuries of Egyptian history revile Shem as pig, dwarf, and other terms signifying their hatred of him, possibly because he slew their mentor, Nimrod. In the same areas, other inscriptions extol the degenerate Ham, who had been corrupted by his consort, the evil Nama, and introduced to the practices of human sacrifice and cannibalism. Egyptian civilization reached its peak during the reign of Shem. The Sphinx is now admitted to be a portrait of him. After his death, the priests not only resumed their evil practices, but they embarked on a successful campaign to black out his name from recorded history, a campaign which has largely succeeded during the ensuing 3,000 years. They also launched terrible punitive actions against Shem's fair-haired descendants, often murdering them, or burning them alive. Not only did the priests falsify the records of Shem, but they also succeeded in eliminating most of the subsequent history of his fair-skinned descendants, the Shemites, or, as they are sometimes called, the Semites. The Arab scholar Murtadi noted that Naaman Khufu, Shufu, the builders of the pyramids, lived with Noah. British Museum Catalogue, 1909. Shem was also referred to by the name of Menes, from the Hebrew Meni, or man, which appears in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, referring to Uranus and his 3 sons, an obvious reference to Noah. Ham later became known as the Egyptian god Amun. Herodotus writes that the first king of Egypt, who reigned until 2320 BC, Eusebius says that 300 successive sovereigns descended from him, the Thinite kings, who had succeeded the demigods. The historian Matado referred to Shem as Menes. As the most able son of Noah, Shem exemplifies the qualities upon which all subsequent civilizations have been built: courage, the desire to build, and the willingness to subdue those who have adopted a lower form of life. He is the Adamite who created civilizations as we have known it. On the other hand, the descendants of Ham, the Canaanites, exemplify the satanic urge to destroy civilization and the rebellion against God. J. Hewlett points out that Adamite meant a thinker, and Mena or man produced Menes, the thinking man. This survives today in the intellectual society, Mensa. The distinction was made to distinguish the lineage of Adam from the pre-Adamites, or non-thinking men. Ruling races of prehistoric man, v. 2p. 364. The Jewish Encyclopedia says that Shem became king of Jerusalem as the representative of Yhwh, so that he could carry in the battle against the slave people, the Canaanites. In Genesis, we find this verse, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," Genesis chapter 9 verse 26. Shem had 5 sons: Elam, from whom came the Persian Empire; Ashur, from whom came the Assyrian Empire; Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. So great was the reverence for the name of Shem in the ancient world that his name in many records became synonymous with Yhwh. Yahweh, or, in a later version, Jehovah, derives directly from the Hebrew verb hava h, meaning, I am. Historically, this was read as the older Khufu, or hwfw, instead of yhwh, and thus it refers to Khufu, or Shem, the builder of the Great Pyramid. It was because all the persecutions of the fair-skinned peoples by the priests that Khufu, which phonetically is almost identical with the Hebrew hava h, became yhwh, the god of the Exodus from Egypt. The Encyclopaedia Britannica notes of Jehovah, the pronunciation 1 is an error resulting among Christians combining the consonants yhwh with the vowels of Adonai, Lord, Adonis, which was substituted by the Jews for the sacred name yhwh, commonly called the Tetragrammaton, or four consonants. The name Jehovah first appears in the manuscript of Martin's Poggio in the 14th century, thus the name of Jehovah, which is commonly used in our churches, is only 500 years old. In order to understand why the name of Shem was systematically reviled and concealed throughout the records of history, we must return to the record of his thoroughly degenerate and evil nephew, Canaan. Canaan was so wicked that his last will and testament to his children was a formula for vice. It read, love one another, that is, of this tribe only, love robbery, love lewdness, hate your masters, and do not speak the truth. This remarkable document, the Will of Canaan, is to be found in only one place in all the world's theological literature, the Babylonian Talmud, where it is presented thusly: 5 things did Canaan charge his sons, love one another, love robbery, love lewdness, hate your masters, and do not speak the truth. Pays 113b. The Will of Canaan has been the Canaanites' prescription for all of their operations during the ensuing 3,000 years. Meanwhile, the people of Shem, knowing nothing of this document, vainly tried to convert the Canaanites, and turn them from their evil ways. If the descendants of Shem had been warned of the precepts imparted by this document, the history of the last 3,000 years could have been very different. The Will of Canaan today remains the operating instructions of the Canaanite heirs, who presently control the world order. At the same time, it remains unknown to the peoples whom the Canaanites continue to rob, enslave, and massacre. The Will of Canaan contains the instructions necessary to resist the results of the Curse of Canaan, which condemn them to slavery. The instructions to hate your masters, that is, Shem and Japheth and their descendants, is a command to commit genocide against the people of Shem. For this reason, all subsequent Canaanite rites are based upon these exhortations to struggle and commit acts of violence against the people of Shem. It is not only the basis for all of the revolutions and liberation movements since that time, it is also a basic incitement to commit genocide and to carry on racial wars. Because of the 3,000-year historical blackout, the people of Shem have never understood their peril, and they have frequently been subject to massacre because their essential goodness made it impossible for them to believe the vileness of the Canaanites. The Will of Canaan has always been concealed from them because it is the basic program of conspiracy and secret rites which enable the Canaanites to wreak their hatred upon the descendants of Shem. Much of the continuous hostility between these two forces is mentioned in the Bible, but never in the basic form which has been stated here for the first time. In his book, The Mystery of the Ages, Herbert Armstrong comments, Canaanites, who were racially dark, had settled the land. God commands the Israelites to drive them out. p. 172. Armstrong cites Numbers 33 as the basis for his reference. During the centuries of oppression and mass murder, God has not stood aside from his people. On the contrary, he has frequently exhorted them to attack and to rid themselves of the peril of the Canaanites. In the early years of this struggle, it was still possible for his children to hear and to obey. The vision of Obadiah is recounted in Obadiah chapter 20, and the capacity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath, and this capacity of Israel which is in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the south. Significantly, the Revised Standard Version omits the mention of the Canaanites entirely. The battle continued over a period of centuries. In Joshua chapter 17 verse 13, we read, Yet it came to pass, when the children of Israel were waxen strong, that they put the Canaanites to tribute but did not utterly drive them out. God expressed his will in the strongest terms to his children in Number 33-52-56, Ye shall drive out all inhabitants of the land, Canaan, before you. And ye shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land, and dwell therein, for I have given you the land to possess it. But if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, then it shall come to pass, that those who ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes, and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein ye dwell. It shall come to pass, that I shall do unto you, as I thought to do unto them. The children of Israel, that is, the descendants of Shem, obeyed God, and did war against the Canaanites, but in later generations, they lost sign of this goal, permitting the Canaanites to live with them. During this period of history, there were great victories against their historic enemy, as recounted in Judges chapter 1 verse 17, and Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. This victory came about because the children of Israel were distraught, and they sought guidance from the Lord. Judges chapter 1 verses 1 to 5. Now after the death of Joshua it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hands. And Judah said unto Simeon his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Later, the victors again fell into the evil practices of those whom they had conquered, and again they were punished by the Lord. Judges chapter 4 verses 1 to 2. The children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of the Canaanites. A later verse in Judges notes that the Israelites prevailed against Jabin and destroyed him and the Canaanites. Exodus chapter 15 verse 15 says, Then shall the dukes of Edom be amazed, the mighty sons of Moab. Trembling shall take hold of them, all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Nelson's Concordance lists more than 85 biblical verses referring to the Canaanites. Most of the references are unfavorable, and invariably they reveal God's determination to punish his people for their misdeeds. Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 1 to 3. Again the words of the Lord came to me, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations. Your origin and your birth are of the land of Canaan. Considering the frequency of references to Canaanites in the Bible, it is surprising that religious leaders rarely make any mention of them. In fact, many of the wealthier religious leaders today are actively in league with the Canaanites, enabling them to garner millions of dollars in contributions from gullible Christians. Certainly the barbaric practices of the Canaanites were never secret, nor were they unknown in ancient times, as evidenced by the number of references available. Psalms 106-37-38. They sacrificed their sons and daughters to the demon, they poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. Because of this well-documented record of their fiendish practices, God issued numerous orders that other tribes should not intermarry with this people. Isaac passed on one of these orders to Jacob. Genesis chapter 28 verse 1, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him, and charged him, You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. We have previously noted that Miriam and Jacob turned against Moses for marrying a Cushite, or black. The men of old were aware of the necessity to protect their genetic heritage, and they were equally aware that it could vanish in a single generation, if the wrong marriages took place. The prohibition against mingling with the demon-worshipping Canaanites remained one of God's strongest commands. God said, So shall we be separated, I and all of thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. Exodus chapter 3 verse 16. God characterized the Canaanites thusly, And I will make them a terror and an evil for all the kingdoms of the earth, referring to the diaspora as a reproach and a proverb, a taunt and a curse on all places where I shall scatter them. Jeremiah chapter 24 verse 9. Thus we see the Canaanites, newly named the Phoenicians, dispersing along all of the trade routes and avenues of commerce throughout the earth. As God prophesied, they spread corruption, terror, and devastation wherever he scattered them. Later known as the Venetians, they dominated the avenues of commerce. When they settled inland, they specialized as merchants, and later, as bankers, at last comprising a group now loosely known as the black nobility, which holds seemingly irresistible power today. God further warned his people against the dispersed Canaanites. Deuteronomy chapter 7 verses 2 to 5, Thou shalt smite them, lilt, utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with Ihum, such as the League of Nations or the United Nations nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make lih one reage with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For Jehovah will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods, so will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. But thus shall ye deal with them, ye shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. This was a direct command to destroy the groves and shrines of the demon-worshipping mystery cults, now known as Freemasonry. The prohibition against graven images has been misunderstood by many well-meaning Christians. God did not prohibit graven images, he prohibited the obscene images of the Baal and Ashtoreth cults, which were made to create sexual excitement as part of their obscene rites. The battle against obscenity goes on today, although it often seems that American Christians are losing it. In making these demands, they were not requests. God was not offering a program for a school picnic, he was laying out the only program which would allow his people to survive on this earth. Otherwise, he warned, and a mongrel race will dwell in Ashdod, Zechariah chapter 9 verse 6. Should his people fail to carry out his instructions, God specifically described what would happen, and in so doing, he accurately described the world of today. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. The stranger that is within thy gates, the Canaanites or their descendants shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him, he shall be the head and thou shalt be the tail. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 15, 43–44. Certainly this is the situation which exists in the United States today. The Venetians control the Federal Reserve System, they lend to us, but we do not lend to them, they are the head, and we are the tail. Having become Satan's curse on humanity, the Canaanites now spread across the earth like some evil plague. Genesis chapter 10 verse 18, the families of the Canaanites were spread abroad. This diaspora brought troubles to every nation in which this people landed. Ezekiel chapter 16 verses 3, 45, and 46 lists the racial tribes of the Canaanites, denouncing them individually: thy father an Amorite, their mother a Hittite, their older sister Samaria, their younger sister Sodom. Jesus, the minister of compassion, when he was asked to cure a Canaanite, denounced them as dogs. Matthew chapter 15 verse 22, and, behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and cried, Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely possessed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. At last he did answer her, verse 26, and he answered, It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. By children, he meant the children of Israel, and that the Canaanites were dogs. She persisted and he finally did heal her daughter. The Canaanite political parties were the Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, Essenes, Essenes, Herodians, and Scribes. A later group, the Edomites, descended from Esau and later intermarried with the Turks, producing a Turco-Edomite mixture which later became known as the Chazars, the present occupants of Israel, according to the great Jewish scholar, Arthur Koestler. The Canaanites were divided into the Amorites, Hittites, Moabites, Midianites, Philistines, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, Sepharvaims, Perizzites, and affiliated tribes, all of which are routinely denounced in the Bible. Genesis chapter 3 verse 17, the Perizzites are the enemies of God, the Ammonites worshipped Moloch Chemos and were demon-possessed, the Ashodites worshipped the fish and god Dagon. They were robbers and hated God, as recorded in the British Museum, ed. The Egyptians were known as worshippers of black magic, which resulted in God's rebuff to Hagar. The Amorites were cursed by God, Ezra chapter 9 verse 1. Hittite was defined as meaning to destroy or to terrify. Perizzite came to stand for strife and disorder. The Sepharvaim, later Sephardim, were revolutionaries. Jebusite stands for trampling underfoot. In his monumental work, The History of the Jews, Joseph Castine writes, p. 19, the Canaanitish cults were closely connected with the soil and expressive of the forces of nature, particularly the force of fertilization. This force or divinity was called Baal. Whenever any question arose involving their existence as a nation, they knew only one God, and recognized but one idea: the theocracy. Thus Castine admits that the Canaanites were fertility cults, but he does not explain that the worship of Baal as a god of fertility, with the obscene rites of his queen, Ashtoreth, was so abominated in the ancient world that whenever Baal was used in this context, in referring to proper names, the suffix for Baal was bosheth, or shameful. Thus we get the names Ishbosheth, Mephibosheth, etc. The destructive nature of the Canaanites upon other nations in which they settled is nowhere more strongly demonstrated than in Egypt, the first land to be corrupted by their barbaric practices. Originally, Baal simply meant Lord in the Canaanite language. The obscenity of the rites soon developed a popular image of Baal which had three heads: the head of a cat, the head of a man, and the head of a toad. His wife, Ashtoreth, also known as Astarte and Ishtar, was the principal goddess of the Canaanites. She also represented the reproductive principle in nature, and in case anyone might overlook it, all of her rites were sexual observances. In Babylon, the temples of Baal and Ashtoreth were usually together. Mainly, they served as houses of prostitution, in which the priestesses were prostitutes, and the male priests were sodomites who were available for the worshippers who were of that persuasion. The worship of the Canaanite gods consisted of orgies, and all their temples were known as centers of vice. They also originated voodoo ceremonies, which became the rites of observance in Ethiopia through the Ethiopian Jethro, the tutor of Moses. These same rites now enthrall tourists in the Caribbean. It was not long before the simple ceremonies of vice began to pall on the worshippers of Baal. They sought greater excitement in rites of human sacrifice and cannibalism, in which the torture and murder of small children were featured. To consolidate their power over the people, the priests of the Canaanites claimed that all firstborn children were owed to their demon gods, and they were given over for sacrifice. This lewd and barbaric practice was noted in Isaiah chapter 57 verses 3–5, "But you, draw near hither, sons of the sorceress, offspring of the adulterer and the harlot. Of whom are you making sport? Against whom make ye a wide mouth, and draw out the tongue? Are ye not children of transgression, a seed of falsehood? Inflaming yourself with idols under every green tree, slaying the children in the valleys under the cleft of the rocks?" Thus Isaiah inveighed not only against the obscene expressions of the blood-maddened orgiasts, their salacious grimaces, but also their now well-established custom of practicing their horrible rites in groves and shrines, where they could murder children without being seen and punished by the descendants of Shem. King Solomon came under the influence of the child murderers, and he rebuilt an altar to Milcom, Melech, from the Hebrew Melech, meaning king. 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 5–8. Melech, or Moloch, was honored by his worshippers by the building of a great fire on his altar. The parents were then forced by the priests to throw their children into the fire. In excavations at Gezer, the pharaoh Merneptah had called himself the binder of Gezer after he put a stop to the obscene rites of the Canaanites at Gezer, McAllister, under the auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund, from 1904 to 1909, found in the Canaanite stratum of about 1500 BC, the ruins of a high place, a temple to Ashtoreth, containing 10 crude stone pillars, 5 to 11 feet high, before which human sacrifices were offered. Under the debris in this high place, McAllister found great numbers of jars containing the remains of children who had been sacrificed to Baal. Another horrible practice was what they called foundation sacrifice. When a house was to be built, a child would be sacrificed and its body built into the wall, to bring good luck to the rest of the family. Many of these were found in Gezer. They have been found also at Megiddo, Jericho, and other places. Halley's Bible Handbook. Halley's also notes that in this high place, McAllister found large piles of images and plaques of Ashtoreth with rudely exaggerated sex organs, designed to stimulate sexual acts. Ashtoreth images found in many areas of the Canaanite influence emphasize oversized breasts, sensuous smiles, heavily accented eyes, and nudity. The demonic nature of this sex worship is traced directly to Ham's intercourse with the witch Naamah on the ark. Colonel Garnier, in his Worship of the Dead, writes, Naamah was celebrated for her beauty, talent, energy, lustfulness, and cruelty, and she was of Nephilim, fallen angel, parentage. The Encyclopaedia Judaica describes the Canaanite demonology as featuring Lilith, the vampire, Reseph, the god of the plague, Deva, god of pestilence, and the god of the underworld, Mot, from Mavet, the Hebrew word for death. Despite their prominence as destructive influences in the ancient world, the Canaanites and their demon god Baal seldom appear in the authoritative works on the ancient Near East. Gaston Maspero's Great History of Egypt, The Dawn of Civilization, published in 1894, and republished in 1968, does not mention either Baal or Canaan. H. R. Hall's Ancient History of the Near East does not mention Shem or Canaan in the index. Baal has a single mention. How much of this is due to the deliberate falsification and destruction of historical records by the Egyptian priesthood cannot be ascertained, but the results are obvious. Another contributing factor is the sudden disappearance of the names Canaan and Canaanites from all historical records after 1200 BC. How did this come about? It was very simple. They merely changed their name. Chambers' Encyclopedia notes that after 1200 BC the name of Canaanites vanished from history. They changed their name to Phoenician, thus the most notorious and most hated people on earth received a new lease on life. The barbaric Canaanites had disappeared. The more civilized Phoenicians, seemingly harmless merchant folk, took their place. Having obtained a monopoly on purple dye, which was highly prized throughout the ancient world, the Canaanites advertised their control over this product by calling themselves Phoenicians, from Phoenicia, Phoenicia, the Greek word for purple. From the outset of their history, the Phoenician Canaanites always managed to get a monopoly on some essential product. They later had a monopoly on tin for some centuries, until the Greeks discovered tin in Cornwall in 233 BC. Joseph of Arimathea, the uncle of Jesus, was said to have owned large tin mines in Cornwall. The change of name did not mean that the Canaanites had abandoned their worship of Baal and Ashtoreth. They became more prudent in their worship of Baal, and in the colonies which they established along the length of the Mediterranean, they built their temples to the female of the species, Ashtoreth. In the Egyptian city of Memphis, the Phoenician temple of Ashtoreth was the largest religious edifice. She was known there as the wife of the supreme god, El, and his 70 deities. In their rituals, Ashtoreth was sometimes worshipped as the male demon, Astereth, who survived in European rites as Astara or Ostara. In this form, he became the patron god of the Nazi movement in Germany. The westernmost outpost of the Phoenicians was Cadiz, a Phoenician colony which derived its name from the Semitic Gadir, or fortress. Their most important colony, which soon became a rival to Rome itself, was Carthage, which they established about 900 BC. The name derived from Hebrew, Kart Hadshat, or New City. The Phoenicians often named their cities with the prefix of new. During the 5th century, the Carthaginians had fought the Greeks and survived, but in 264 BC, Rome attacked in full force. A series of wars ensued, called the Punic Wars, because the Carthaginians called themselves the Punics. Saint Augustine noted that the Punics among themselves referred to their people as the Chanani, or Canaanites, but this name was like a secret code. They never used it in dealing with other people. Whether for purely commercial reasons, or because they feared a military power astride their avenues of commerce in the Mediterranean, the Romans determined to utterly destroy Carthage. They succeeded in this resolve so absolutely that present-day archaeologists are not sure just where Carthage was located. From 264 to 201 BC, Rome waged 3 Punic wars against Carthage, culminating in the defeat of their leader, Hannibal, by the Roman armies under the command of Scipio Africanus. The Romans killed or took into slavery every Carthaginian and razed the city. They completed their task by sowing the land with salt, so that nothing would ever flourish there again. Nothing ever did. This defeat, although a major setback, did not destroy the world operations of the Canaanites, but it did inculcate in them a fierce hatred of all things Roman, which ever since has been characterized by the Canaanite school of propaganda as fascism, from the Roman rods, or fasces, which were carried by the magistrate to symbolize his determination to maintain order. The later Masonic assault upon the Catholic Church was largely dictated by the fact that it was headquartered in the city of their most ancient enemy, Rome, and therefore the papacy became to the Phoenicians the modern embodiment of the force which had destroyed their most important headquarters. Few Americans realize that when the New School of Research in New York denounces fascism, joined by the columnists of the New York Times and the New York Post, they are merely echoing their ancient anger over the destruction of Carthage. Here again, our historians have only one goal: to obscure the past and to prevent us from realizing the nature of the forces at work. It was not only the Canaanites who spread across the earth. The descendants of Shem also multiplied and journeyed to find greater opportunities for their families. They moved from country to country, founding great kingdoms and dynasties, which have survived to the present day. There are many people who can agree that the kings and leaders of the Western nations are descended from the tribe of Judah, but they fail to recognize an important fact, which is entirely omitted in the King James Version of the Bible, that there were 3 branches of the tribe of Judah. Those who lump all the descendants of the tribe of Judah together do not realize that there was a tainted branch. There were the families of Pharez and Zara, Judah's pure-bred sons out of Tamar, and there was a 3rd branch, Judah's descendants from a Canaanite mother, Shua, who were known ever afterwards as the cursed Shelonites. Tamar was the daughter of Aram, the youngest son of Shem. Shua called Tamar's sons bastards because they had been born out of wedlock, while the twins claimed to be the rightful heirs of Judah because they were of pure-blooded stock, the Adamite strain. From the Shelonites descended 31 cursed tribes of Canaanites of Judea and Samaria, including the Sepharvaims, a name which the Canaanites had adopted for deceptive purposes. At the birth of Pharez and Zara, the midwife, seeing that there were twins in the womb, realized that it would be necessary to mark the firstborn, who would have primogeniture. She quickly wrapped a red thread around the wrist of Zara, but it was Pharez who came out first from the breach. The Messiah was descended from Pharez, and he was said to have been sent by God to heal the breach which had existed since the birth of Pharez and Zara. Tamar, mother of Pharez and Zara, had a descendant named Tamar Tefi, known in Irish legend as the daughter of Pharaoh. She married Eochaid, king of Ireland, who was known as the Prince of the Scarlet Thread. Thus the two lines of Pharez and Zara were again reunited. The scarlet thread subsequently became an integral part of British history. A red thread is symbolically woven into every rope which is used by the Royal Navy, and every British monarch has delivered to him official documents which are wrapped with a red cord. The term also survives in red tape, that is, the official red cord which must be unwound before any state business is transacted. There is also the red carpet which tradition required to be unrolled before royalty walks in. Before he would give Tamar in marriage, Herriman, the father of Tamar, demanded that serpent worship and the rites of Bel, which were then practiced in Ireland, be renounced. The serpents then disappeared from Ireland, and there are no poisonous serpents there today. A later legend is that Saint Patrick expelled the serpents from Ireland. Both legends call attention to the demonic practices of the Canaanites, as well as their descent from the serpent. Its banishment established Ireland as a land of the true religion of Yhwh, or the descendants of Shem. The disappearance of the serpents also signified that the evil powers of the Canaanites had vanished from Ireland. Both Spain and Ireland show their direct connection to the descendants of Shem in their names. Spain occupies the Iberian Peninsula. From Iber, or Hebrew, Ireland is known 18 Hibernia, the land of the Hebrews, as are the Hebrides Islands. In his History of Ireland, Roger Chauvier says that Ireland is the last remaining part of Atlantis which is still above the surface of the sea. In his History of Ireland, A.M. Sullivan writes of the legendary origin of the present Irish race. The Milesian colony reached Ireland from Spain, but they were not Spanish. They were an eastern people who had tarried in that country on their way westward, seeking, they aid, an island promised to the posterity of their ancestor Gadilius. Gadilius was the son of Niul, who was the youngest son of the king of Scythia. As a child, Gadilius had been bitten by a poisonous serpent. He was near death when his father persuaded Moses to use his rod to cure him. From that day, the Milesians carried westward their banner, which was emblazoned with a dead serpent and the rod of Moses, until they found an island which had no poisonous snakes. The sons of Milesius, Gadilius's descendants, who sailed from Spain to Ireland were Heber the Fair, Emergen, Colpa, Heber the Brown, Ir, and Herriman. Their descendants ruled Ireland for 1,000 years, the dynasty being established by Niul, who ruled at Tara from 310 to 405. He is described by Sullivan as a splendid hero of the Gaelic blood, tall, fair-haired and blue-eyed, a great and noble-minded warrior, kind in hall and fierce in fray. From him descended the kings of Ireland, the Nils, these conquerors of Ireland. The Milesians derived their name from Milesius, the soldier, from the Latin miles, from which we get the word militia. Gadilius, the founder of the line, derived his name from the Hebrew gadol, meaning to become great, or in plural the exalted, the fortune seekers, or the fortunate ones. Because of their great pride and their natural abilities, the Irish were later referred to as being from the land of kings. Of almost any Irishman, it could be boastfully said, sure, and he's the descendant of kings. From earliest records, the Irish and the Britons are shown to be historic enemies. Apuleius wrote in 296 AD of the two races, the Britons and Hibernia. Eumenius always wrote of Hibernia as the enemy of Britain. Caesar's notes on the Gallic Wars, 58 to 50 BC, wrote of Hibernia, west of Britain. The world was now swept by two diametrically opposed tides of history. On the one hand were the highly creative and productive descendants of Shem, who have since become known as Semites, and on the opposing side were the cursed Canaanites, who historically were the anti-Semites, the foes of the tall, fair-haired, and blue-eyed descendants of Shem. Because the Semites were always known as great warriors, they handily defeated the Canaanites in every military encounter, and in many cases obeyed God's command to drive them out and to destroy them utterly. But the anti-Semites seemed to have great staying power. When driven out of one country, they appeared in another to continue their same type of corruption and betrayal. While the Semites were busily establishing one great empire after another, Ahasuerus building the Assyrian Empire, Cyrus the Great building the Persian Empire, and Shem himself creating the great Egyptian civilization, the anti-Semites were developing their own talents. These included a talent for trade and commerce, for travel, for making themselves at home in any country, and among any race of people. Generally they established their trading colonies along the seacoasts, for they lacked the courage to venture into the great wilderness of Europe, where the Semites always made themselves at home. The Canaanites always remained true to the precepts of the will of Canaan. They were true to each other, regardless of the circumstances. They were constant in their love of robbery, their love of lewdness, and their hatred of the masters, that is, anyone who tried to interfere with their corrupt way of life. And they always refused to tell the truth. By remaining loyal to these unchanged precepts, the anti-Semites had at their disposal vital weapons for their war against the people of Shem. The Shemites, on the other hand, being fiercely individualistic, never hesitated to pit their empires against each other, or even family against family, their overweening pride always taking precedence before any racial or historical imperative. During the Middle Ages, the people of Shem found their typical characteristics best expressed in such organizations as the Teutonic Knights, a group of warriors which was invincible for hundreds of years. At the same time, the anti-Semites were busily expanding trade routes, and amassing their profits from trade. To this day, the British aristocracy professes disdain for anyone who sullies his hands with trade, an ancient prejudice against the Canaanites. With these profits, they eventually became bankers to the world. In pursuing this objective, they found a great opportunity during the Crusades. Not only did the Crusades open up trade routes throughout the known world, but they also opened up new avenues of graft and corruption, which allowed the Canaanites to amass even greater profits. When the Christian knights departed for the Crusades, dedicating themselves to the service of Christ, the Canaanites, who prudently remained at home, now perfected various schemes to rob the knights of their money and property while they were away. In ancient knighthood and the Crusades, we find that some of the Crusaders found shelter and protection at the hands of the Teutonic Knights, who were engaged in looking up the frauds perpetrated by the rapacious monks and clergy, who had forged title deeds and mortgages upon lands and property of absent Crusaders or those who had fallen in defense of the cross in the Holy Land. Time for reflection and study of the causes of the Crusades at home and abroad, when, other than the scum of Europe which settled upon its dregs, the best people had been almost entirely obliterated from the face of the continent. The rapacity of the popes and clergy down to the lowest monks was appalling to those self-sacrificing, stalwart warriors of the cross, who had returned and found utter strangers in the places and homes of their kindred. Tad upon investigation it was discovered that frauds, forgeries of title deeds, and confiscations under pretexts of heresy had despoiled their kindred, and the meager few who had survived were beggars upon the highway and lanes, perishing as tramps by the wayside. The Knights of the Teutonic Order built the city of Riga in Latvia in 1201, they conquered Estonia in 1220, they conquered Prussia in 1293, establishing a military tradition there which ended only after World War II. Although they were disbanded in 1809, the Teutonic Knights remained the inspiration of the German military establishment, which guided Germany through 2 world wars. It was Hitler himself who wrote "Finis" to their proud traditions, when he concluded the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939. Not only did this pact cede the nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the ancient strongholds of the Teutonic Order, to the Communists or Canaanites, but subsequently, all of the great estates of the last heirs of the Prussian tradition, the last survivors of the Teutonic Order, fell into the hands of the onrushing Soviet hordes. By this time, the reader must be thoroughly confused. The Semites are really the anti-Semites or Canaanites, the heirs of the Curse of Canaan, whose corrupt acts are dictated by the will of Canaan. The true Semites are the fair-haired warriors who built one great civilization after another. Then how do we recognize these various forces in today's world? By their deeds ye shall know them, those who are engaged in murderous conspiracies, those whose only loyalty is to secret international organizations, those who promote the use of drugs, bizarre sexual practices, and criminal undertakings, in short, those who continue the rebellion against God. These are the Canaanites, the anti-Semites. Those who remain true to Christ are the Semites. Despite great calamities and the sweep of powerful historical forces, the genetic pools of the original people of Shem, as well as those of the Canaanites, remain fairly consistent. How do we recognize the one group from the other? You should have no problem in looking about you and deciding who are the true descendants of Shem, often fair-haired, fair-skinned, predominantly blue-eyed, healthy, creative, productive, proud, disdaining to engage in any dishonest activity, and always fiercely individualistic. These are the people who remain true to the tradition of the people of Shem. The Canaanites, on the other hand, are generally shorter, darker, more furtive, and almost always engaged in some type of criminal activity, usually with special government approval or license. Roget equates license with anarchy, interregnum, mob rule, mob law, lynch law, nihilism, reign of violence, in other words, the acts of the Canaanites. Yet in the United States today, we have imposed on the citizens requirements for license to do any of the things free men would not be licensed to do, to drive or own a car, to engage in a profession, and many other intrusions into the individuality of the people of Shem. License, which does not appear in the constitution written by and for the people of Shem, means setting up requirements that only the Canaanites can meet, or license which only the secret clubs of the Canaanites will grant to their own, no others need apply. This is the cohesiveness required by the will of Canaan in everything they do, socialistic and communistic, the individual submerged in the mass, and committed to conspiratorial social and business practices. They are also frequently involved in some sort of extracurricular sexual activity which can be traced directly back to the orgies of Baal, human sacrifice, and obscene sexual rites. At the same time, these anti-Semites will go to great lengths to conceal their true identity and their real loyalties. In their communities, they are often found to be leaders in activities advertised as compassionate and caring. They are often to be found in government offices, in the media, and in the educational institutions. In these areas, they ruthlessly promote the interests of their own kind, while presenting a solid phalanx of opposition to any one of the individualistic descendants of Shem who enter these professions. The great asset of the Canaanites is that the people of Shem have no idea what is going on. They rarely find success in a profession despite their great natural talents and appetite for hard work. Throughout their careers, they are oppressed by the realization that luck never seems to favor them, while others find promotion almost automatic if they are members of their rivals, the Canaanites. Now time grows short. History will not allow the people of Shem additional centuries, or even decades, to come to their senses and realize what is going on. Just as they have been victims of massacre and genocide for centuries, the people of Shem now face the determination of the Canaanites to exterminate them utterly and finally, a goal which they hope to achieve by the end of this millennium.